Rebecca Taylor, Liberal Democrat MEP for Yorkshire and the Humber. You're a keen blogger, and on that blog you've written in the past about e-cigarettes. How has the reaction you've had from constituents and from people replying to you helped inform your opinion and your position on e-cigarettes?
Yeah, well, the blog I wrote was really sort of setting out kind of what questions needed to be answered, sort of this needs to be addressed, that needs to be addressed if we regulate electronic cigarettes in an appropriate way. And I was amazed by the number of comments, because usually I get 3 or 4 comments on the blog, and within sort of 2 weeks I had 70. And I don't know what there are now, 80, 90 even, which gives you an idea of how this was of interest. And what was particularly sort of that really made me sort of jump on this issue was the stories of individuals of how they tried for years and years to give up smoking, and their kids hated the fact that they smoked, and this is the only thing that they found that's enabled them to stop smoking cigarettes. And they said their life's been transformed, they're much healthier, their kids are happy now, they don't smoke, they don't smell, they're saving money as well. And it was really the personal stories. And when I looked into how the medicines regulation would work, I just really became unconvinced that that was the way forward.
Given what you're saying, if it goes through as planned, which would mean that e-cigarettes would be classed as medical products, what would the impact of that be for your constituents and for the industry?
Well, it's uncertain really, but I think we can say quite safely that perhaps some products that people are already using will no longer be around, because a lot of the products people are using now are made by SMEs, small companies. They are not going to have the resources to put their products through the medicines authorisation process, so maybe they'll just pull out of the market. So there'll be probably less choice available, which is obviously not a positive thing for someone who successfully stopped smoking tobacco and moved to an electronic cigarette.
And are you convinced by that argument that smokers are giving up smoking tobacco because of e-cigarettes, but maybe they're not giving up smoking altogether?
There are some people who do dual use, but most of the people I've spoken to, individuals, they don't want to go near a cigarette. They do not call themselves smokers, they call themselves vapors because they identify themselves as non-smokers. So there is, I think, some dual use, but the majority of people seem to switch. Initially, people don't think they're going to stop smoking tobacco. They just think, oh, I'll use the e-cigarette when I can't have a cigarette. But I've had quite a few people who said that initially they didn't plan to stop smoking, but they found that they much preferred an electronic cigarette, and they thought, well, why am I still smoking tobacco? So I don't know what the stats are, but I think the majority actually stop smoking tobacco entirely.
And what about the nicotine that e-cigarettes contain? Isn't that still something of concern, still something that perhaps needs regulation?
Yeah, it's the same nicotine that's in gums and patches that you can buy in supermarkets and that are given to 14-year-olds by GPs. But yeah, nicotine is an addictive substance, but on its own, it's not particularly harmful to health unless you've got high blood pressure and pre-existing coronary heart disease, and you'd probably be advised to avoid it. You'd also be advised to avoid caffeine as well. So you can't really compare the harm of an electronic cigarette, which is a nicotine basically, nicotine vapour, with a cigarette. They're in a different universe.
These products will still be available in the UK if they're classed as medical products, it seems, because medical nicotine patches are widely available. So what's the big problem?
Well, that's assuming they can get a medicines authorisation and they can afford to get one, because not all the companies will be able to do that. As I mentioned, some of them are small or medium-sized companies, and they're just not going to they haven't got the deep pockets that or the expertise in this area. So yes, there will be some, if we move to medicines regulation, there will be some e-cigarettes available, and they will be in the UK, although elsewhere it will be quite a different story. They will be as available as patches and gum are. In other countries, it could be quite different. They could be only available in pharmacies, which means they would be less available than tobacco, and that's kind of one of my red lines. You cannot make electronic cigarettes less available than tobacco.
Just finally, you're saying that you don't want these classed as medical products. Do you see some alternative? Do you see some need for some regulation, or does Europe not have a role in this at all?
No, I think there is a need to harmonise the regulation. There's actually a lot of consumer legislation that should apply to electronic cigarettes, but it's not always being enforced. And I think there are a few areas where you need to tighten up. For example, there isn't actually a minimum age of purchase, and obviously it should be the same as tobacco. So there are a few areas. It's not a question of no regulation. I'm not advocating no regulation of e-cigarettes, but I think it's possible to tighten up the existing legislation and enforce it better without resorting to the medicines legislation.